Hey guys, welcome back. Eric Smith here, Five Reasons Sports contributor, also co-host on Scouting the Fins. This is part two of a film review series on Jaylen Wright. I think we're probably going to be able to wrap it up in just these two videos. So if you haven't watched the first one, I'd encourage you to go over and check that one out first. But it's not completely necessary. I'll link it in the description. In that video, we looked at all of Jaylen Wright's outside zone runs, and we broke it up by good runs, runs that were dead in the water due to the blocking, and also some runs where Wright needs to show some signs of improvement. After that video was shared on X, one of my followers, Finn's Noob, had this comment. So he said, am I imagining things, or is the too long didn't read of this breakdown that Wright's utterly lost playing outside zone unless he has a fullback's butt in front of him to show him the way? And I said that I don't know if I'd go that far. Wright has some issues that are fixable, but it's stuff that does need to get fixed. But I do think that that observation kind of highlights the importance of Alec Ingold in the rushing attack, even if it's not showing up on the stat sheet. And then he, countered and said, was there a single good rep where he wasn't simply following Ingold? I'm pretty sure he wasn't following the fullback on any of the reps where he made bad choices. So I guess we could say he knows how to follow his fullback properly. And, obviously an interesting observation. And I went back and looked at those, and I think he's got a point. A lot of the good runs on that video were Jaylen Wright following Alec Ingold, and you can see that on several of those, it almost seemed like Ingold was making that decision and Jaylen Wright was just following along. And then if you hop over to the ones where I say that we need to see some improvement from Jaylen Wright, a lot of those are ones he does not have a fullback leading him. So I think there might be a little bit of truth to that. And while I have pulled the videos for the concepts we're going to talk about in this video, I haven't really looked at it from that lens. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see if that holds up. All right, as we get into these different concepts, we're going to start out with counter concepts here. And we're going to look at the good ones first. So on this one, our counter concepts, we're going to essentially have two pullers, and they're not coming from across the formation on this particular play. You're going to have Ingold coming in and kind of inserting from the outside and Eichenberg kicking out, but it's still the same blocking concept. On this one, you can see that Wright's doing a good job. Right, this is a gap concept. He's hitting that hole, reading those second level blocks, nice little jump cut, and off to the races. Next one here. So counter solid here because you're going to have no pulling guards, but you have Smythe kicking out, and then Ingold is your lead blocker. Got the double team with the combo there. Again, gap scheme, hitting that gap, getting through the initial hole, and getting a solid gain. And then one more for the good counter plays. And this is a little more of a traditional counter. You do have the F is the one who is kicking out in this scenario, which is Julian Hill, and then Eichenberg is your lead insert. Eichenberg probably should have gone more to the inside there, but nice job by Wright. Obviously a pretty easy read to get through the initial lane, but nice little jump cut to get an extra yard or two. We didn't have any bad plays for Jaylen Wright in the counter concepts, but what we did have, were some where we had blocking issues. And on this one, you can see that Austin Jackson, struggles at the point of attack there, and not a whole lot that Wright can do. Next one here. On this one, you got Ingold coming across as your kick out with Julian Hill leading through. Austin Jackson kind of gets stuck in no man's land there. And I felt like Wright did a pretty good job of navigating that, even though we didn't get exactly what we wanted out of the blocking. And then this one, so a little different look with the counter solid. So you've got uh, Johnny Smith is going to be your kick out with Julian Hill leading through. And on this one, we get the double team there with Armstead and Jones. You can see that Johnny Smith kind of gets pressed back into the hole. We get that blocked and we're cooking pretty good there. But in terms of Jaylen Wright, again, this is gap scheme, a little more rigid than the zone schemes, um, and has to give a little jump cut there before he wants to. So that's all we have for the counter scheme. Didn't have any issues with Jaylen Wright running those. Next concept we're going to look at here is going to be our crack toss concept. Not necessarily a toss here, but still in that same family. And you can see that, line does a good job here. Tyreek Hill gets just enough of Von Miller to get Jaylen Wright outside. And Wright does a good job getting to the outside and finding his lead blocker in Durham Smythe and using that block somewhat to get a good gain. Next one here. So now we are getting the toss. Again, same idea there that Tyreek Hill is getting just enough of that edge player. We got Tanner Connor out there, and Wright doing a good job pressing this out as far as he can before squeezing inside of Tanner Connor's block on the crack toss. And then last one for the good reps here. So there, again, right now they get two guys leading outside. All right, you got Jalen Waddle sealing, Julian Hill's out there, Alec Ingold's there. You can see the lane developing. And Wright does a good job of also staying inside of Patrick Paul's block before finding the open field there. So really good job navigating through those. As far as the blocking issues on crack toss, just had one to look at here. Right, and on this one, you can see that we're cracking with Alec Ingold. We're getting Teron Armstead outside, but Ingold and Armstead are going for the same guy and letting this guy run free. Probably would have liked to see Ingold do a better job sealing that defender to the inside. But the way it played out, probably would have liked to see Teron Armstead turn up there earlier. But again, not one for Jaylen Wright here. Can see that he can't get to the outside on this crack toss, has to try to turn it up, and ends up running into traffic. And then just one here where I felt that he could have done a little better on the read. And, this is a little bit controversial, right? In the sense that, as you can see with the previous plays we've looked at, right, this play is designed to get outside right away. And you can see that on the edge here, we had motion kind of messing things up. As we're looking at it here, Achane bumps to the outside. And then both Achane and Johnny Smith go down to crack that defender. One of them should have been leading outside here. You can see that Achane kind of gets there late. Again, not a huge negative on Jaylen Wright here because, we should have had somebody attach that defender already. But as we're seeing this develop, right, rather than trying to press this further to the outside, this is the type of play that I would prefer to see him stick his foot in the ground and hit that lane there. So, not a huge negative, but just a little bit of room to improve, in my opinion. And then just because we're trying to be comprehensive in the plays that we're watching, just going to have two good ones here. These are, counter reverse. The Dolphins call this dope. So basically they're faking the counter. In this case, it's, faking to Jonnu Smith. And then Jaylen Wright is coming around on that reverse action and, does a good job here of, getting vertical, reading the blocks, finding the lane. And we're going to see the same thing on this one. Now it's Malik Washington that's going to fake the counter, right? But then it's going to flip to Jaylen Wright coming to the backside. Nice little crack there by Waddle, getting Brewer in space. And a good job by Wright of not, trying to run that all the way to the edge, right? But seeing Smythe's block there and getting vertical. So like I said, just a couple of plays on this counter reverse, but both of them were good for Jaylen Wright. Now we're going to look at a couple of long trap concepts. This is similar to counter, but really just have one puller. Um, so on this one, you can see, right, we're bluffing the end, we're doubling up to the linebacker, kicking out with Eichenberg. Another gap scheme. The double doesn't quite get to number 43 the way that I think it probably should have. Feels like it should have been Jonnu to number 7. Should have been the combo of Armstead and Jones to 43 with Eichenberg kicking out the end there. But Wright does a good job of getting to the gap quickly and, you know, running through the tackle. Obviously, he does get tackled, right? But not being hesitant here allows him to turn this from a 2 yard gain into a 5 yard gain. And then one more on the good side of long trap. So a very similar look there. And again, you can see at we're should have Connor getting up to 42. This combination block should be getting to 43. Um, and again, right is hitting the right hole, right? Gap scheme, more restrictive, banging it up in there. But again, doing a solid job of, finishing with contact and ends up falling forward on that. And we didn't have any bad ones for long trap from Jaylen Wright's perspective. Um, got a couple of pin and pulls here, and they're both going to fall under the poor blocking part of it. The Dolphins were not very good at this concept in 2024. On this one, we've got Eichenberg pulling outside, maybe finding contact a little earlier than we was expecting there. Obviously, not a good look to get blown up in the backfield. Wright decides to try to bounce that, um, and it works out, but wouldn't say that you could really judge his ability to read based on that one. And then another one here going to be pin and pull again. Again, I think that on this one, um, I feel like probably should have had Julian Hill blocking down on this defensive end to allow Brewer to get outside, but the defensive end's let in. Brewer kind of gets pressed back by it. Wright has to adjust to it. Um, gets tackled in the backfield. Again, right, we're including these ones in here just for the sake of completeness in terms of looking at the runs and finding out, what concepts Wright is good at and where he needs to improve. But the reality is that, the pin and pull concept is not one the Dolphins blocked up well at all in 2024. And then again, right, just for, the sake of being comprehensive, we're going to have just a couple of toss plays here. This one works out. They're faking it opposite and then tossing backside. We see this in, Madden has a play very similar to this. It was very popular back in the, early 2000s, but basically just outruns the linebacker. That one works out. Next one here, very similar concept, but you can see that this defensive end here is going to play it much better, right? And he's going to be able to wrap right up in the backfield. Not going to say this is good or bad for Wright. This is the type of play that you really need the coaching staff to be on point here and be able to call this in a scenario where it's not going to get taken down the backfield that way. All right, so now let's get to the, I guess we'll call the meat and potatoes part of this one. And this is going to be our inside zone and duo concepts. I'm going to start here with the only one that I have as being, purely a blocking issue. And as you can see on this one, Eichenberg gets hit with the swim move there. You got big number 95 in the backfield. Nothing that Jaylen Wright can do on that one. All right, so let's get into the good ones here. So here, nothing groundbreaking here. This is a very easy read for Wright. I think he does a good job here at the second level of being a little patient and finding the crease there. Solid run there. Another one here against the Titans again. Similar idea there. Well, not similar. The block by Julian Hill is looking to kick that guy out, but they end up on the ground. Wright does a good job. Probably, could have pressed that to the inside, but nice job getting to the outside, running through a diving tackle and getting a solid gain. Now we're looking against the Patriots, right? And even though this is only a short gain, right? What I like about this one, he's finding the lane, right? Looking at the butts of the offensive lineman is telling him where to go. He's not second guessing it. He's getting a nice little jump cut, getting into it, lowering the shoulder, right? And then the offensive line has the opportunity to drive that forward a little bit. So even though it's not a massive gain, right? This is the kind of run that keeps you ahead of the chains is something we talked about with the outside zone stuff. Against the Patriots again here, very similar idea, right? In the sense that if we're reading the butts of the lineman, right there is where that lane is developing, right? Presses it outside a little bit, but then gets where he needs to be by then. Um, Brewer's falling off that block a little bit, but again, because we're, you know, sticking that ball up there where it should be on that run, gives the offensive line an opportunity to drive that forward a little bit. Next one here, looking at the Colts. And, this one, again, doing a good job of, right, seeing the double teams here on this duo run, right, seeing the way the linebacker's flowing over top. So that's going to tell Wright to cut this back to the inside. And then from there, he's doing a good job of navigating those blocks, right? Some little jump cuts, not losing momentum. He's not completely stopping and trying to change the momentum, right? Two jump cuts out of the weeds, off to the races. Another one here. And on this one, again, not a big gain here, but when you look at the way that the blocking is developing, everybody is blocking down here. And, Hill's not able to get inside this defender, but Wright does a good job. See how he's squeezing that double to, avoid that tackle happening early? Nice job squeezing it and is able to fall forward for a couple of yards. So, not the kind of guy that's going to, you know, Derrick Henry run through those type of tackles, but this is the kind of nuance that you like to see out of your inside zone runner that he's able to, squeeze to the backside of that block and get something out of that compared to what it could be. Another one here. So now we're getting, similar type of action in the sense that, once that running back once a linebacker commits that way, right now we're hitting this to the backside. You got Johnny not able to really keep that defender to the outside, but just a nice job. See how tight he is to Patrick Paul's butt there? Turns that into an arm tackle and is able to get a few extra yards on that one. Now we're against the Raiders. And again, just, patient, but not stopping completely, right? Even on the jump cut, he's gaining ground with that. And you can see that, reading the way that combo's developing, right? And as he gets through here, right? Not the big guy's just going to pound it up inside there, right? But that quick little jump cut, gonna find an extra 3, 4, 5 yards. Still against the Raiders on this one. And, a little more patient on this one, right? So a little more muddy with the reads here. You can see that the linemen are still, facing towards him, except for Brewer, who is completely sideways. But nice job there of, keeping the stride short, not trying to, you know, huge jump cut and run outside, right? It's quick jump cut, feet are still under him, getting vertical, and getting something, solid out of what really didn't look like there was going to be much. Against the Patriots, right? Again, just those little jump cuts, they're impressive, right? And always gaining ground on these. Right? He's taking the handoff. And, maybe he could have banged it up in there, but based on the leverage of these two, I understand why he bended this back to the backside. Nice little jump cut. You can see he's gaining ground the whole way. And then he's squeezing nice and tight to that Teron Armstead block and, getting a couple yards out of that. Got a few more to go through here. So this is going to be against the Jets. Right? And that, very obvious pre-snap read when you see a bubble like that. Pretty obvious where you should be taking it. Does a good job of, squeezing that a little bit to keep that linebacker from sprinting to that hole. And would have liked to see Jones be able to take over that block from Brewer a little better, right? If Jones could have taken that over and sealed it, Brewer's getting that next level, and we could have had a nice seam there. But like the way that Wright is manipulating and reading that. Another one against the Jets here. So running into Patrick Paul, which isn't ideal. Um, but inside zone here, right? Looks like the lane is going to develop there initially. Brewer's not able to hold that leverage. So Wright reads that and, bends that a little bit towards the backside. Wright read just, ran to Paul, which obviously isn't an issue for Wright on that. And then last one that we're going to have here for the inside zone runs. Right, so it's more of a duo, right? But like I said, I still keep those in the same family. Same idea here, right? Real easy read, but I like how as he's getting through to that next level, he's not looking to get sideways and run horizontally. He's staying nice and vertical. And while he doesn't get the extra yards there, at least, tries to run through the tackles. All right, so as you can see there, his runs in those gap and inside zone and duo runs are a lot more refined than what he had in his outside zone runs. And, I didn't really go through and count the number of times that he had a fullback versus didn't, but I didn't feel like that was, as much of a factor in these type of runs. You know, and that goes back to Tennessee. I mean, Tennessee ran a lot of inside zone, so it's not a huge surprise that he, shows a lot more awareness in terms of those schemes. The gap schemes are very easy for running backs because you're basically telling them exactly what gap to go through. I think that Jaylen Wright shows a lot more maturity in terms of being able to navigate those blocks when you get him vertical in those inside zone duo schemes than he does with outside zone. And that may have been a big part why they, brought in a guy like Alexander Madison and Ollie Gordon. I think those guys are probably a little more adept at this point than Jaylen Wright at outside zone. But I think there is still a very prominent role available for Jaylen Wright in this offense. And, maybe he does grow. Maybe he continues to, you know, get better reading those outside zone runs. But even if he doesn't, if you have, Devon Achane as your primary running back, you have Ollie Gordon who, shows a lot better vision in the outside zone than Jaylen Wright. And then you still have, Jaylen Wright, who's more of your gap and inside zone running back. Still think it's a very nice grouping of running backs they have there. So as always, leave a comment below. Let me know what you think about, this video and the two-part series of both the outside zone and the other concepts and how you see Jaylen Wright playing in this upcoming season. Thanks for watching. We'll talk again soon.